Snoop Dogg's transition from first-degree murder defendant to America's primary domestic mascot executes a chilling masterclass in corporate brand alchemy and systemic survival. The caricature of a relaxed smoker masks a brutalist architecture designed to outmaneuver the legal complex, demanding a life sentence in 1993. Strategic pivots transformed street-level threats into global commercial hegemony. Can a capital murder trial provide the blueprint for billion-dollar rebranding? Does the soul survive the sale? To understand the paradox of the man the world now calls Uncle Snoop, we have to return to the beginning. Long Beach, California, in the late 1980s. Before the glitz, before the Grammys, before Dr. Dre discovered him on a mixtape, there was only the geography of survival. The general narrative suggests a natural transition from street life to stardom, but the reality was a violent collision of talent and systematic failure. This wasn't a choice, it was an environment. Long Beach in this era was a fragmented landscape defined by the cracking of the American dream, a post-industrial vacuum filled by the rise of the Rollin' '20s Crips. In his autobiography, The Dogfather, The Times, Trials, and Hardcore Truths, written with David C., Calvin Broadus Jr. describes a childhood split between the sanctity of the church choir and the brutalist reality of the East Side. This is where the fundamental architecture of his persona was forged. While most saw a young man sliding into delinquency, those who looked closer saw a strategist. Even in the depths of the crack cocaine epidemic, Broadus was developing a linguistic mastery. He wasn't just a participant in the street, he was its most articulate documentarian.
The turning point wasn't a record deal, but a realization of the trap he was in. In the early 90s, the crisis was marked by his arrest for possession with intent to sell, a moment that should have ended his story before the first chapter was written. Instead, it served as the catalyst for a desperate pivot. He began to treat his lyricism not as a hobby, but as a vehicle for extraction. He was documenting a lifestyle that was actively trying to consume him. He wasn't just rapping, he was building a digital map of a world the rest of America was terrified of. This period created the raw material, the hyper-realistic G-Funk aesthetic pioneered on Dr. Dre's The Chronic, that would eventually be packaged and sold to the masses. But at this moment, there was no global icon. There was only a thin, charismatic kid trying to outrun the statistical inevitability of a 6x9 cell. But just as the map was being drawn, the reality of the streets would catch up with the music in a way that nearly silenced the record forever.
In 1993, the trajectory of American hip-hop hit a wall of cold judicial reality. At the height of his debut album success, Snoop Dogg wasn't celebrating sales, he was facing a life sentence. The charge, first-degree murder in August 1993, that led to his February 1996 acquittal. This is the pivot point where the art and the artist became indistinguishable to the eyes of the state. It was a moment of profound legal friction. The prosecution attempted to use his lyrics, the very documents of his survival, as a blueprint for his criminality. They weren't just prosecuting a man, they were putting a subculture on trial. According to the official court transcripts and investigative postmortems of the People vs. Broadus, the legal battle was a high-stakes chess match played out against the backdrop of post-LA riot tension. The data was grim. At the time, the conviction rate for gang-related homicides in Los Angeles was staggering, and the media had already written the obituary for his career. This was the moment the mirage of the gangster lifestyle met the crushing weight of the LA justice system. If he stayed the course, he would become another statistic in the graveyard of hip-hop history. But the acquittal in February 1996 wasn't just a legal victory, it was a psychological rupture. It triggered a radical cause and effect mechanism that few saw coming. While his contemporaries like Tupac Shakur leaned further into the outlaw persona, Broadus realized that the death he was writing about had nearly claimed him. He saw the anomaly in his own survival. He began a deliberate move away from the hyper-violent narratives that had defined Doggy Style. He recognized that the brand he had built, the dog that barked at the system, needed to evolve or face certain extinction. This was the birth of the strategic pivot. He didn't just change his lyrics, he changed his frequency. He understood that to survive the American justice system, he had to become something the system couldn't justify destroying. He had to transition from a threat to a staple. He began to soften the edges, leaning into the smooth rather than the rugged, initiating a decade-long experiment in radical self-preservation that would eventually lead him to the most unlikely alliances in corporate history. But to achieve this, he first had to escape the very label that had turned his life into a cinematic tragedy. The transition from a high-profile murder defendant to a beloved household name is not a trajectory of luck, it is a masterclass in brand architecture. To the casual viewer, Snoop's evolution feels like a series of happy accidents, a guest spot here, a cooking show there. But look closer at the mechanics of his career, and you see a sophisticated application of psychological market theory. This is the mirage of spontaneity, masking a calculated multi-decade campaign of cultural repositioning. As explained by Kevin Lane Keller in his definitive work, Strategic Brand Management, this phenomenon is known as secondary brand association. Keller's theory posits that a brand can effectively borrow the attributes of another entity to reshape its own image. Snoop Dogg didn't just participate in collaborations, he performed a systematic audit of his own public perception. By tethering his image to safe cultural anchors, from youth football leagues to high-end lifestyle brands, he triggered a cognitive shift in the audience. He wasn't deleting his past, he was diluting it. He leveraged corporate advertising structures to act as a protective shield. If he is selling insurance or light beer to middle America, he is no longer a threat, he is a utility. The paradox of this reinvention lies in its flexibility. Snoop remained authentic to his roots, while the meaning of Snoop became whatever the market required it to be. This is a fundamental shift from being a product of his environment to being a product of his own design. He utilized the very systems that once sought to exclude him to become their most reliable spokesperson. This wasn't just a change in music, it was a change in economic alignment. He moved from the periphery of the economy to its very center, using the gravity of mainstream brands to stabilize his own orbit.
This architectural feat allowed him to survive the shifting tides of the music industry, but it required a brutal physical extraction from the company that held his name hostage. To understand the cost of this reinvention, we must look at the politics of the mid-90s record industry and the dangerous game of musical chairs played between the West Coast and the South. To truly own the new Snoop, he first had to pay a ransom for his soul in the most cutthroat boardroom in America. By 1997, Death Row Records, once a billion-dollar empire, was collapsing under the weight of its own volatility. Tupac Shakur was gone, Suge Knight was behind bars, and the label that had birthed the Snoop Dogg brand through partnerships with Interscope Records and Jimmy Iovine had become a prison of a different kind. This is where the paradox of success becomes visible. Snoop was one of the most famous men on the planet, yet he was essentially an indentured servant. He reportedly hadn't seen a royalty check in years, trapped in a contract that functioned more like a feudal system than a business agreement.
The politics of this era demanded a move that defied logic. To escape the suffocating grip of the West, Snoop turned to the South, specifically to Master P and the burgeoning No Limit Records. To the industry elite, this looked like a downgrade. No Limit was known for its cheap aesthetic, garish gold foil album covers, and high-frequency, low-fidelity releases. But this was a masterstroke of risk mitigation. Master P wasn't just a rapper, he was a businessman who understood the fundamental value of ownership and physical protection. In the 1998 move to No Limit, Snoop wasn't trading for prestige, he was trading for sanctuary. He effectively utilized a protective strategy, moving his base of operations to New Orleans to put geographic and cultural distance between himself and the lethal politics of Los Angeles. It was a calculated retreat. By aligning with Master P's operation, Snoop secured the one thing Death Row couldn't provide, a future. He traded the G-Funk throne for a role as a soldier in a different army, allowing the heat of the 90s coastal wars to dissipate. This was the first time Snoop demonstrated the anomaly of his career, the ability to swallow his ego in favor of long-term survival. Most artists would have let their pride anchor them to a sinking ship. Snoop chose the life raft, even if it was made of cheap plastic. This transition proved that the dog was not a fixed point, but a liquid brand. He proved he could survive without the machinery that created him, setting the stage for an even more radical experiment in cultural alchemy. But while the No Limit era saved his life, it was a chance encounter with a domestic icon that would eventually save his legacy from the confines of genre. In the history of cultural branding, there is no greater anomaly than the 2008 meeting on the set of The Martha Stewart Show. On one side, Martha Stewart, the high priestess of domestic perfection and a symbol of waspy establishment. On the other, Snoop Dogg,
a man whose name was once synonymous with social disruption. This was not a gimmick, it was the catalyst for a new form of cultural currency. It was the moment that G became gentle without losing the gangster. This partnership performed a radical operation on the American psyche, effectively neutralizing the fear associated with Snoop's past. The collaboration eventually evolved into Martha and Snoop's potluck dinner party on VH1, running from 2016 to 2020. This is the manifestation of the liquid brand concept. In the modern attention economy, relevance is not about depth, but about the ability to flow into any container. By pairing with Stewart, Snoop achieved a level of brand immunity. How could a man who bakes brownies with America's grandmother be considered a threat to the social fabric? This association created a protective layer of irony and wholesomeness that allowed him to bypass the gatekeepers of the mainstream. It was a strategic alliance that served both parties. Martha gained street cred and a path to redemption after her own legal battles, while Snoop gained entry into the architecture of the American household. The paradox lies in the fact that Snoop didn't change his persona to fit Martha's world, he simply repositioned his existing traits. The relaxed attitude of the street became the chill vibe of the kitchen. The vernacular of the hood became the slang of a cool uncle. This is what theorists call cultural arbitrage, taking an asset from one market, hip-hop, and selling it at a higher value in another, lifestyle media. He wasn't just a guest on her show, he was infiltrating the very core of middle American comfort. Consequently, this alliance signaled the end of Snoop Dogg as a rapper and his birth as a permanent cultural artifact. He became one of the few figures in history to successfully bridge the gap between public enemy and national treasure, without ever apologizing for where he came from. He proved that in the landscape of late-stage capitalism, the most valuable asset isn't authenticity, it's versatility. This cultural positioning would prove prophetic when he took the stage at Super Bowl LVI in February 2022, performing alongside Dr. Dre, Eminem, Mary J. Blige, and Kendrick Lamar in a triumphant celebration of West Coast hip-hop that cemented his status as American royalty. But the ultimate transformation wasn't just about joining the establishment, it was about buying the very company that once tried to own his soul. In February 2022, just weeks before his Super Bowl triumph, the narrative of Calvin Broadus reached its climax. In a move that felt more like a geopolitical reclamation than a business deal, Snoop Dogg acquired the brand that had once been his prison, Death Row Records, from MNRK Music Group and Blackstone. This was the ultimate paradox. The artist who had once fled the label's control for his own survival was now its owner. He didn't just return to the house he helped build, he bought the deed. This transition from product to owner represents the final evolution in his survival strategy, the shift from navigating the system to becoming the architecture of the system itself.
This wasn't a nostalgic vanity project. It was a calculated play in the landscape of modern intellectual property. By acquiring the Death Row catalog, Snoop reclaimed the master recordings of his own youth, effectively undoing the extraction model of the 1990s music industry. He understood a fundamental truth about the modern economy. In the digital age, the one who owns the archive owns the future. He immediately began integrating the label into the Web3 ecosystem, attempting to pivot a legacy gangster rap label into a digital-first lifestyle brand. This is the anomaly of Snoop. He is a man of the 90s who operates with the foresight of a Silicon Valley venture capitalist. Consequently, this move solidified his status as a strategic sovereign. He is no longer beholden to the whims of record executives or the gatekeepers of traditional media. By owning the brand that nearly broke him, he performed a poetic closing of the loop. He leveraged the decades of brand equity he built with Martha Stewart, Super Bowl appearances, and corporate endorsements to fund the liberation of his own history. It is a rare example of an artist successfully outmaneuvering the industrial complex that usually consumes its stars long before they reach middle age. The acquisition serves as a catalyst for a new era of creator ownership. Snoop isn't just selling music anymore, he is selling the idea of Death Row, rebranded, sanitized, and ready for global consumption. He has effectively decoupled the music from the trauma of its origin, turning a history of violence and litigation into a profitable, nostalgic mirage. He has become the CEO of his own legend, proving that the only way to truly survive the game is to eventually own the board.
But as he sits atop this reclaimed empire, one must wonder, what is the cost of turning a life of survival into a permanent commercial performance? We are left with a haunting synthesis. Snoop Dogg is not the man we think he is. because the man we think he is his most successful product. He has achieved the impossible, a state of cultural omnipresence, where he is simultaneously a relic of a violent past and a beacon of a commercialized future. This is the mirage of authenticity. He didn't survive the street by escaping it. He survived by turning it into a global franchise. He successfully navigated American capitalism by becoming so flexible that the system could no longer find a reason to break him.
The paradox lies in the trade-off. To become Uncle Snoop, the lovable Olympic torch-bearing mascot, he had to perform a systematic smoothing of his own jagged edges. He has turned his survival into a high-definition mirage, a narrative so polished that we forget the beginning was almost a life sentence. He has moved from being a victim of the legal system to being a primary shareholder in the attention economy. He is the ultimate anomaly, a man who stared into the abyss of the 1990s and convinced the abyss to buy a t-shirt. As we look at the empire he has reclaimed, a final reflective question lingers. In his journey from the Long Beach crucible to the boardroom of death row, did Snoop Dogg actually change the predatory world that tried to destroy him? Or did he simply become the most sophisticated salesman the world has ever seen, selling us back the very image of the outlaw we once tried to lock away? Perhaps the greatest trick the dog ever played wasn't surviving the system, but making us believe he was never its prisoner to begin with.